The conference hall was alive with quiet anticipation. A low hum of conversation and shifting seats as journalists, students, and local citizens waited to see what would unfold. At the center of it all, Tim Scott leaned back casually in his chair, a half-smile on his face, projecting confidence and a sense of ease. He had a reputation for charm and sharp rhetoric, and today intended to unsettle his opponent just enough to gain the upper hand. The audience could sense the tension in the air, even before a single word of the debate had been spoken. Then, Jasmine Crockett walked in. Her steps were steady, measured, and unassuming, but she carried with her a presence that immediately drew attention. She did not need to speak loudly or assert dominance. Her quiet confidence and clear focus made it obvious. She was ready to engage, and she would not be intimidated. Scott broke the silence first, leaning forward slightly. "So, Crockett, I hear you've been talking a lot about digital regulation," he said, his voice light but edged with a teasing tone. A ripple of chuckles ran through some of the journalists nearby, sensing the playful jab. His intent was clear. He wanted to rattle her, to provoke a reaction that could shift the momentum in his favor. For a moment, the room held its breath. Would Crockett respond defensively? Would she stumble under the attempt at public ridicule? Crockett's gaze met his evenly, her expression calm but focused. She allowed a brief pause before speaking, not out of hesitation, but as a strategic choice. "Senator Scott," she said evenly, "I appreciate your perspective. But laughter doesn't change the impact of the decisions we're discussing." Her tone was calm, measured, and precise. The subtle strength in her voice immediately shifted the energy of the room. Scott's attempt to dominate with humor had failed. Instead, the focus moved to substance. Journalists leaned forward, recognizing that Crockett was not going to play into theatrics. Citizens in the audience felt the gravity of the moment, the beginning of a discussion that promised to explore real-world consequences rather than sound bites. Crockett began by framing the debate around two interrelated issues: personal freedom online and social responsibility. She described the explosion of digital communication, noting how social media, messaging platforms, and online communities are now central to education, business, and personal relationships. "Freedom of expression is essential," she said. "But freedom without accountability can harm people in ways we may not immediately see." She offered examples of ordinary citizens: a college student struggling to navigate complex digital rules, a small business owner facing reputational risk from misinformation, and a parent trying to manage online safety for their children. Each story was concise yet vivid, making abstract principles tangible and relatable. Scott responded quickly, leaning back with his half-smile still in place, but this time with a more serious edge. "I understand your point, Crockett, but overregulation can kill creativity and innovation. If we start policing every post, every comment, every idea, we risk stifling the very freedoms we claim to protect." His tone was firm, confident, and carried a subtle challenge. He framed his argument around liberty and minimal interference, appealing to those who fear that rules can become too controlling, too invasive. The audience sensed the contrast: Crockett emphasizing human impact, Scott emphasizing principle and liberty. Crockett nodded, acknowledging his argument without conceding ground. "I hear you," she said. "Freedom is critical. But consider what happens when that freedom allows harm to spread unchecked. Misinformation, harassment, and digital abuse aren't hypothetical. They affect real people every day." She painted a scene of a student harassed online over a misunderstood comment, highlighting how the consequences extended beyond the digital space into mental health, learning, and social trust. She spoke of a business whose reputation was damaged by inaccurate online reviews or misleading posts, creating stress and financial hardship. Her examples connected the debate to tangible experiences, grounding abstract principles in real life. Scott leaned forward again, this time with a furrowed brow, signaling that he respected her points but wanted to reinforce his perspective. He shared instances where overzealous rules had unintended consequences, content creators punished for minor infractions, citizens discouraged from speaking freely, and innovative projects delayed by excessive compliance requirements. His examples reminded the audience that while protection is necessary, overreach can stifle opportunity and growth. The tension between freedom and responsibility had now fully emerged, each side presenting thoughtful, compelling reasoning. The dialogue moved quickly, flowing between principle and consequence. Crockett maintained a calm, authoritative presence, never allowing Scott's initial taunt to dictate the conversation. Instead, she asked questions that invited reflection. How can society balance liberty and safety? How can rules protect without restricting? How can we ensure that the most vulnerable are not harmed in the pursuit of ideal freedoms? Her questions were not accusatory. They were probing, engaging the audience and Scott alike. The room was silent, except for their voices, and the audience hung on every word, captivated by the intelligent, respectful exchange. Crockett then turned to a broader societal lens, explaining how digital freedoms intersect with responsibility in education, business, and community life. She highlighted that rules must evolve alongside technology, that the human experience must remain central, and that accountability mechanisms should be accessible and understandable. Scott responded by emphasizing that any rules must be carefully calibrated to avoid overreach and preserve core freedoms. Their perspectives, though different, complemented each other in illustrating the complexity of the issue. By the end of the session, the initial laughter that had tried to unsettle Crockett had faded entirely from the room. The audience had witnessed an exchange that moved from a playful jab to a meaningful, reflective discussion on the balance between freedom and responsibility in the digital age. Crockett's calm confidence had transformed a potential distraction into a moment of clarity, demonstrating that reasoned argument and human-centered. Examples could dominate where theatrics might fail. Outside the immediate debate, attendees began discussing what they had heard. Students shared stories of their own experiences with online freedom and the challenges of digital responsibility. Journalists noted how Crockett's calm handling of Scott's taunt made the discussion more substantive and compelling for public understanding. Citizens reflected on how rules, accountability, and freedom intersect in their daily lives. The energy in the room was no longer tense with anticipation, but engaged with curiosity and reflection. Part 1 ended with a subtle but important shift. Scott's initial attempt to dominate the conversation with humor had been neutralized by Crockett's calm, intelligent reasoning. The focus had moved from personalities and theatrics to the core issue: the balance between freedom and responsibility in a society increasingly dependent on digital communication. The audience left with questions rather than answers, thinking critically about the impact of both individual actions and systemic rules in modern life. The conference hall, once alive with chatter and the potential for ridicule, had become a space for reflection. Students, journalists, and citizens understood that this was not about winning a debate in the conventional sense. It was about exploring multiple perspectives thoughtfully and respectfully. Crockett's measured responses had set a standard. Intellect and clarity can silence ridicule, and meaningful dialogue can emerge even from moments designed to distract. Part 1 had set the stage for a deeper dive, leaving the audience eager to see how the discussion would evolve. The atmosphere in the conference hall shifted as Part 2 began. The audience, already captivated by the opening exchange, leaned forward in their seats. Tim Scott, still projecting casual confidence, leaned into the conversation with a measured tone. He wanted to keep the debate grounded in principle, emphasizing liberty and minimal interference. "Crockett," he began, "we all agree that digital spaces can cause challenges, but overregulation can stifle innovation. If we start policing every post, every video, every idea, we risk silencing creativity. His voice carried both conviction and a subtle challenge. The half-smile he wore hinted at his confidence that his argument was compelling enough to regain control of the discussion. Jasmine Crockett listened carefully, her expression calm yet deliberate. She didn't react to the half-smile or the casual tone. Instead, she prepared to anchor the discussion in real-world consequences. "Senator Scott," she said, "freedom is indeed essential, but it is only meaningful if it is exercised responsibly. Without accountability, the spaces we create for freedom can inadvertently cause harm." She provided a concrete example. A high school student faced online harassment after sharing a harmless opinion, resulting in anxiety, disrupted learning, and strained relationships. The story was brief, vivid, and relatable, bringing abstract concerns into a human context. The audience responded subtly, leaning in, recognizing the real stakes behind Crockett's words. Scott nodded, acknowledging the example, but he shifted to cautionary reasoning. He recounted instances where overzealous enforcement of digital rules had unintentionally punished creators or suppressed voices. "We can't prevent all harm by restricting all speech," he said. "Some mistakes are inevitable. And overregulation can limit experimentation, dialogue, and expression." His argument was grounded in principle, and it appealed to those concerned about freedom and autonomy in modern society. Crockett countered quickly, emphasizing that principle and human impact must coexist. She described a local business owner whose reputation was affected by misinformation circulating online. Despite following guidelines meticulously, one misinterpreted post caused client complaints, delays in service, and stress for employees. She emphasized that freedom without responsibility can affect not just the individual, but families, communities, and livelihoods. Her storytelling was precise, concrete, and emotionally resonant without being exaggerated. The audience could visualize the scenarios, making the discussion feel personal and relevant. Scott leaned forward slightly, his tone shifting from playful to serious. "I understand that harm can occur," he said. "But if we impose too many rules, we risk creating a system where every action is scrutinized and fear stifles initiative. Freedom requires some risk." He highlighted examples of digital entrepreneurs delayed by complex compliance requirements and content, creators discouraged by vague enforcement guidelines. His point was clear: structure must protect people, but it should not become oppressive. Crockett responded with a measured yet firm approach, steering the conversation toward the balance between structure and accessibility. She highlighted the challenges ordinary citizens face in navigating complex rules: students unfamiliar with digital policies, small business owners without legal support, and parents trying to manage online safety for their children. "Rules alone are not enough," she said. "They must be accessible, understandable, and implemented in a way that protects people without overwhelming them." Her words framed the debate as practical and grounded in lived experience. Moving beyond abstract theory, the audience absorbed every detail. Students whispered notes to each other, connecting Crockett's examples to their own online experiences. Journalists captured the nuances, understanding that the debate had evolved into a meaningful discussion on societal responsibility and personal freedom. Citizens in the gallery reflected on their daily interactions with digital spaces, realizing the conversation was not hypothetical. It mirrored their own experiences. Crockett then posed a thought-provoking question. If the systems designed to protect us are too complex for the average person to navigate, who truly benefits from them? She emphasized that fairness requires not just rules, but usability, clarity, and support. Her words invited the audience to reflect on the intersection of policy, technology, and everyday life. Scott acknowledged the dilemma, emphasizing that freedom entails some level of risk, and that overly protective measures can hinder dialogue and innovation. The tension between liberty and responsibility was now fully established, creating a rich space for critical reflection. The exchange accelerated, fast-paced but respectful. Scott continued to argue from principle, focusing on autonomy, liberty, and the dangers of overreach. Crockett countered with human-centered examples, highlighting consequences, accessibility, and empathy. Every point she made was concrete and relatable, showing how rigid application of rules could produce unintended harm even when intentions were good. Her calm, confident delivery ensured the focus remained on substance rather than spectacle. Crockett illustrated ripple effects across society, misinformation affecting communities, harassment impacting mental health, and business disruptions stemming from miscommunication or false claims. Scott emphasized the necessity of principled freedom to maintain trust in systems and encourage innovation. Their perspectives created a dynamic tension that highlighted the complexity of modern digital life. Neither side sought to dominate. Both aimed to explore the balance between principles and practical outcomes. As the debate continued, Crockett shifted to emphasize accountability alongside freedom. Responsibility is not just a personal matter, she said. Platforms, regulators, and individuals all have roles to play. Freedom must be paired with safeguards that are usable and effective. She offered examples of communities benefiting when online spaces were thoughtfully moderated, showing that rules can enhance freedom rather than restrict it. Scott responded by stressing the importance of careful calibration, ensuring that safeguards do not evolve into censorship. The room's energy reflected the intellectual engagement. Students, journalists, and citizens alike were absorbed in the dialogue, recognizing the real-world implications of the issues being discussed. Crockett's calm responses had transformed the initial tension into a substantive discussion about the challenges of balancing liberty and accountability in digital life. Scott's insistence on principle ensured that the debate remained grounded, highlighting the risks of overreach while respecting the human dimension. By the end of Part 2, the hall was quiet but thoughtful. The playful taunts that had opened the session had faded, replaced by intelligent, reflective discussion. Crockett had demonstrated that calm reasoning and clear examples could shift focus from theatrics to substance. Scott had shown that principle and caution remain critical in any debate about freedom. The audience left with questions, not answers curiosity sparked. Thinking critically about their own digital responsibilities and freedoms. Part 2 concluded with a subtle but powerful message. Effective dialogue does not require conflict or intimidation. Crockett's measured approach, combined with Scott's principled arguments, had created a space for meaningful discussion. Students reflected on how to navigate digital freedoms responsibly. Business owners considered balancing compliance with creativity. Citizens pondered how accountability, freedom, and accessibility intersected in their daily lives. The debate had become a mirror for society, encouraging reflection on both personal and collective responsibility. The tension, once superficial and performative, had evolved into a thoughtful examination of modern digital life. Freedom, responsibility, principle, and consequence had been explored in depth. Each perspective respected and illuminated. The audience understood that the conversation was not about winners or losers, but about engaging critically with complex social and technological issues. Crockett had maintained her composure and clarity, demonstrating that intelligence, calm reasoning, and human-centered examples can dominate any attempt at intimidation. Scott had emphasized the value of principled debate and careful oversight, ensuring that multiple perspectives remained visible and respected by the end. Part 2 had set the stage for deeper exploration. The audience was curious, engaged, and eager to see how the discussion would evolve in Part 3. Knowing that the balance between freedom and responsibility in the digital world is nuanced, critical, and far from resolved. The foundation had been laid for a debate that was fast-paced, intellectually stimulating, and grounded in real-world consequences. A model for thoughtful public dialogue in a modern, connected society. The room felt charged as Part 3 began. A subtle electricity in the air that comes when a debate transcends talking points and touches real human experience. Tim Scott leaned forward, adjusting his notes, projecting the calm authority of someone confident in principle. Jasmine Crockett, standing with quiet poise, was ready to shift the conversation from theoretical argument to the practical consequences of online freedom and responsibility. The audience, from journalists to students, sensed that this part of the discussion would dig deeper, exploring how rules and freedoms intersect with human lives. Scott opened the session by emphasizing freedom as a core principle. "We cannot let fear dictate action," he said, voice steady but pointed. Innovation, expression, and creativity thrive in spaces where people are allowed to experiment, make mistakes, and challenge ideas. Overregulation risks turning opportunity into restriction. His argument highlighted a consistent concern for liberty. Without freedom, society stagnates, voices are silenced, and growth is stunted. He cited examples of tech startups delayed by complex compliance requirements and content creators discouraged from participating in discourse, stressing that rigid enforcement can have unintended negative consequences. Crockett responded immediately, calmly reframing the debate around accountability and human impact. "Freedom is vital, yes," she said, "but freedom without responsibility can harm people in very real ways. We're talking about students, workers, families, and communities who navigate these digital spaces every day. Rules exist not to punish, but to create safe, fair environments. Without them, harm spreads quietly, unnoticed until it's too late." She provided a vivid example: a college student who posted a misunderstood comment online and faced relentless harassment, leading to stress, isolation, and disrupted education. The audience leaned forward, feeling the immediacy and relatability of the scenario. Scott acknowledged the example but maintained a focus on principle. "I hear you," he said, "but we must be careful that in seeking to prevent harm, we don't restrict dialogue or innovation. Some mistakes are inevitable, and freedom must allow room to learn from them." His tone was firm, reasoned, and cautious, emphasizing the delicate balance between oversight and autonomy. He illustrated with a case where a misinterpreted social media post led to temporary public outrage, showing that overreaction and hasty regulation can create more harm than good. Crockett then expanded her argument, connecting individual incidents to systemic challenges. She described a small business owner whose reputation and livelihood were impacted by misinformation circulating online. Despite careful compliance with rules and best practices, false claims and misinterpretations created financial and emotional stress. She framed the debate in terms of both principle and consequence. Freedom is essential, but the impact on real lives cannot be ignored. The audience responded to this approach. The combination of specificity and relatability brought abstract concepts to life. Scott shifted focus, emphasizing the necessity of consistent rules and predictable systems. He explained that principles of fairness and liberty are essential to avoid arbitrary or biased outcomes. If we prioritize individual inconvenience over consistent enforcement, we risk undermining trust in the system itself, he said. His argument appealed to the logical, structural side of the debate. Laws, policies, and systems must be predictable to maintain social stability and fairness. Crockett countered with practical reasoning. Predictability is valuable, yes, she said, but predictability without context is blind. Consider parents trying to navigate online platforms for their children, teachers managing misinformation in classrooms, and students making sense of rapidly changing digital rules. Systems must remain flexible, accessible, and responsive to the people who rely on them. She illustrated how rigid application of rules can disproportionately affect those without resources, expertise, or guidance, turning principle into unintended punishment. Her examples were vivid yet simple, drawing the audience into the lived reality of the debate. The exchange intensified, fast-paced, but respectful. Scott emphasized liberty, caution, and structural integrity. Crockett emphasized human consequences, accessibility, and accountability. The dialogue had evolved from general principles to a nuanced exploration of balance. The audience, engaged and reflective, saw both sides of the argument. Freedom without responsibility can harm, but rules without flexibility can restrict and intimidate. Every sentence in the room carried weight, and every example Crockett gave grounded the discussion in real experience. Crockett then posed a question that challenged the audience to reflect on society's role. If rules are in place but are so complex that ordinary people cannot navigate them, who is truly protected? Her question was calm but sharp, forcing reflection without confrontation. She emphasized that fairness is not just about enforcement. It is about accessibility, understanding, and the ability to participate safely in society. The audience murmured in agreement. Her examples and questions had transformed the discussion from abstract debate to shared reflection. Scott responded thoughtfully, acknowledging the concern. He pointed out that no system is perfect and that some risk is inherent in freedom. We cannot eliminate all mistakes, he said, but we must preserve spaces for learning, discussion, and innovation. Overreach can create fear and stifle participation. He reinforced the idea that freedom is not absolute license, but a space where risk and accountability coexist. Crockett, sensing the moment, shifted to a broader social perspective. She highlighted how misinformation, harassment, and unchecked behavior online have ripple effects, affecting schools, workplaces, families, and local communities. Her voice remained calm, but each example she gave was emotionally resonant and relatable. She painted a picture of society as an interconnected web, where decisions in digital spaces ripple outward, impacting real people. Scott nodded, acknowledging the point, but maintained that preserving freedom remains essential to prevent overreach and maintain trust in systems. By the middle of Part 3, the debate had fully evolved. The initial casual taunts were long forgotten. The conversation now centered on substance. Crockett's.com/authoritative presence had redirected attention from theatrics to practical reasoning. Scott's emphasis on principle had maintained balance, preventing the discussion from veering too far into emotion. Together, they created a dialogue that was fast-paced, intellectually stimulating, and deeply relatable to anyone navigating digital life. Crockett then connected the discussion to accountability mechanisms, noting that platforms, regulators, and individuals all have responsibilities. She highlighted how simple, clear rules and responsive systems can prevent harm without stifling freedom. Freedom is not a free pass to harm others, she said. We must design systems that protect people, provide guidance, and remain flexible enough to account for real-world situations. Scott responded with caution, warning that poorly designed systems could inadvertently create barriers and stifle initiative. The courtroom or conference hall was now silent with reflection. Students, journalists, and citizens listened intently, absorbing the interplay between principle and consequence. Crockett's storytelling had brought abstract ideas to life, while Scott's reasoned defense of liberty ensured that the debate remained grounded in enduring values. Every example, question, and counterpoint reinforced the complexity of balancing freedom and responsibility. As Part 3 drew to a close, the audience understood that this was more than a debate, was a model for thoughtful public discourse. Crockett had shown that calm reasoning, clear examples, and human-centered arguments could dominate any attempt at intimidation or ridicule. Scott had shown that principle, caution, and consistency are vital to maintain trust and ensure that freedom remains meaningful. Together, they highlighted the challenge every society faces, creating rules that protect without restricting, promoting freedom without allowing harm, and ensuring fairness without overreach. By the end, the audience was engaged, reflective, and curious. They understood that the digital world, like society itself, requires balance. Freedom and accountability, principle and consequence, innovation and protection all coexist. And thoughtful dialogue is the only way to navigate the complexity. Crockett had maintained her calm authority. Scott had emphasized liberty and structure. And the debate had reached a level of maturity and depth that was rare, compelling, and educational. Part 3 had set the stage for the final phase: reflection. Resolution and insight into how society can balance freedom with responsibility in practical, meaningful ways. The final segment of the debate began with a palpable sense of focus in the room. Tim Scott and Jasmine Crockett had moved past playful taunts and quick exchanges. The discussion centered entirely on substance. The audience, students, journalists, and citizens, was fully attentive. Every word mattered. Crockett stood tall, poised, and deliberate, while Scott leaned forward slightly, projecting calm authority. The conversation had shifted to reflection: how to balance freedom, accountability, and real-world consequences in a digital society that affects millions. Crockett opened with a clear, human-centered summary of the stakes. Freedom and responsibility are intertwined, she said. Our digital spaces are not abstract. They are environments where real people live, work, and learn. Every action online can ripple outward, affecting students, families, businesses, and communities. We cannot discuss freedom without considering the real lives impacted. She described a local community center that struggled to maintain online safety for youth programs. Misinformation and harassment online had disrupted events, affected funding, and strained staff, highlighting that abstract principles have concrete consequences. The audience responded immediately, nodding in recognition of issues they might have personally experienced or witnessed. Scott acknowledged her point, emphasizing the necessity of protecting liberty even as we address consequences. We cannot eliminate all harm, he said. Freedom carries risk, and our goal must be to preserve spaces where people can learn, create, and innovate. Overcorrecting for every problem risks turning freedom into fear. His tone was firm, reasoned, and confident. He provided examples of past overreach, digital platforms penalizing minor missteps, creative expressions stifled by unclear policies, and discussions muted due to fear of misunderstanding. His argument underscored that principle and caution are critical to prevent the slippery slope of unnecessary restriction. Crockett then emphasized the role of accessibility and understanding in policy. Rules and protections are only effective if they are usable and understandable, she said. She cited a parent navigating privacy regulations to protect their child online, highlighting the complexity and inaccessibility of existing systems. The parent's intent was responsible, but missteps were common because policies were difficult to interpret. Crockett used this example to show that human-centered design matters. Rules without clarity fail to serve the very people they are meant to protect. The audience leaned in, sensing the practical relevance of her argument. Scott responded by emphasizing structure and predictability. We cannot compromise the integrity of systems for the sake of ease alone, he said. Consistency ensures fairness and trust. Without a stable framework, we risk arbitrary decisions, bias, and unintended consequences. Liberty is meaningful only when everyone operates under the same principles. His point reinforced that freedom is not license. It is meaningful within a structure designed to protect everyone equally. The tension between principle and consequence was now fully apparent, providing the audience with a nuanced understanding of the issue. Crockett Sensing the importance of reflection, shifted to community impact. She told the story of a small business whose online reputation had been damaged by misleading posts and misinformation. Employees experienced stress, clients were confused, and the business struggled financially despite compliance with rules. Protection is not only about law enforcement or regulation, she said. It is about creating systems that work for people, that prevent harm before it spreads, and that remain responsive to real-life situations. Her words made the abstract debate tangible, showing that policies affect human behavior in real, sometimes unexpected ways. Scott nodded, acknowledging the concern, but he reiterated the importance of liberty and principle. We must strike a careful balance, he said. Safeguards are essential, but they cannot become oppressive. Freedom must remain a space where mistakes are possible, where learning occurs, and where innovation is not stifled by fear of missteps. He highlighted the complexity of enforcement in digital spaces, noting that overly strict rules can unintentionally penalize responsible actors while failing to address the most serious harms. The dialogue moved quickly, back and forth, each participant adding depth and clarity. Crockett emphasized empathy, real-world consequences, and accessible solutions. Scott highlighted principle, structure, and the risks of overreach. Together, they created a debate that was both intellectually rigorous and emotionally resonant. The audience, deeply engaged, could see both sides clearly. Unchecked freedom can harm, but rigid enforcement can restrict and intimidate. Neither perspective could be fully realized without the other, and the room understood this delicate balance. Crockett then highlighted the importance of accountability at multiple levels. She pointed out that digital platforms, regulators, and individuals all share responsibility. We cannot rely solely on rules or technology, she said. Accountability requires engagement, education, and accessible tools that allow people to act responsibly without fear or confusion. She shared an example of a community-led initiative to moderate online discussions in schools and neighborhoods, showing how collaboration can protect freedom while minimizing harm. The example was practical, positive, and forward-looking, offering solutions rather than just critique. Scott responded with cautionary reasoning. He agreed with the need for accountability, but stressed that rules must be carefully designed to avoid unintended suppression of speech or creativity. He cited cases where well-meaning interventions had discouraged participation, delayed innovation, or created uncertainty. Oversight is necessary, he said, but it must preserve freedom as the foundation. Without freedom, systems lose meaning, and society loses trust. The balance between accessibility, consequence, and liberty was now fully explored, offering the audience a comprehensive view of the issue as the debate moved toward conclusion. Crockett summarized the human-centered approach. Rules must protect without restricting, support without overwhelming, and remain flexible to adapt to real-world challenges. Scott emphasized that liberty, principle, and consistency ensured that protections are meaningful and fair. The combination of these perspectives created a reflective, balanced discussion that left the audience considering not just policies, but the values and consequences behind them. The room was quiet as the final moments unfolded. Crockett's calm confidence had transformed potential intimidation into an opportunity for clarity and insight. Scott's principled stance had reinforced that freedom is meaningful only within a structure that balances risk and consequence. The audience absorbed the lesson. The debate was not about winning or losing, but about understanding the interplay between freedom, accountability, and human impact. Students reflected on their digital lives. Business owners considered practical policy implications, and citizens pondered how rules shape daily interactions. By the end of Part 4, the initial tension, which had begun with Scott's playful taunts, had completely dissolved into thoughtful engagement. Crockett's instant, intelligent responses had silenced attempts at intimidation. Not with confrontation, but with clarity, reasoning, and evidence. Scott's careful articulation of principle ensured that the discussion remained grounded. Together, they provided a model for civil discourse, fast-paced, intellectually stimulating, and emotionally resonant, suitable for a society navigating the complexities of modern digital life. The audience left not with definitive answers, but with understanding. They recognized that freedom and responsibility, principle and consequence, structure and empathy must coexist. Crockett had shown the power of calm, authority, and human-centered reasoning. Scott had emphasized that liberty, principle, and caution remain vital in any discussion about regulation. The final moments illustrated that respectful, thoughtful debate can illuminate complex issues, offering insight without alienation, clarity without hostility, and engagement without theatrics. Part 4 concluded with a reflective, lasting message. Intelligent dialogue allows societies to navigate complexity. Freedom is essential, but accountability ensures it remains meaningful. Rules must be clear, flexible, and human-centered, while principle provides the foundation for fairness. Crockett and Scott had demonstrated that differences in approach need not lead to conflict. Rather, they can foster understanding, insight, and solutions. The audience, now quiet and reflective, left inspired to think critically about digital spaces, personal responsibility, and the careful balance between liberty and consequence in everyday life.